Shivasiri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Gauranga Nityananda Shri Advaita. Excuse me, 1 second. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasiri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Shri Krishna Pristaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sanyavadi Paschatya Satarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasiri. I wanted to continue from where we left off last week. I went to my file folder to find that file. Found the file and there was nothing in it. So, yeah. So, anyway, I have something else I can read. And, but first I wanted to go over some other points. I was thinking about, and I made this point last time, but I don't know if it's clear, and I was thinking about it more, and I thought we could talk about it more. We have this, perhaps we could call it a paradox or a dilemma, that you can only understand Krishna to the degree your senses are purified. So then sense gratification contaminates the senses. Bhakti Mama Vijananti, Krishna says you can know me by bhakti. And for us, the greatest reward is knowing Krishna or experiencing Krishna, being able to appreciate him. And you can only appreciate him with purified senses. And so, this is the great reward of bhakti, that when you hear the holy name, or you hear Bhagavatam, or the Shastra, you see the deity, and you engage in other devotional activities, you experience something very deep and very profound because of purified senses. And especially when you're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam in the more esoteric or intimate pastimes of Krishna, you begin to understand them a little more deeply. Because when we're materially contaminated, those pastimes are sometimes appearing to be like ordinary mundane affairs, and that's how they appear to the contaminated mind or senses. So when our senses become purified, then we start to understand the tattva of Krishna Lila and the rasa, and we start to understand things that we could never understand if our senses weren't purified. So we can go, the pastimes are unlimited, so we can go unlimitedly deep in Krishna's pastimes and unlimitedly relish and see the same pastime in different ways and understand it on different levels. So that's the real, what we could say, that's the real payoff. Welcome everyone. I can see your names as I'm talking. That's the real payoff of bhakti. And there's a verse in Bhagavatam that only the person who's blinded by ignorance, or the person who's transcendentally situated, will actually be happy, because the person blinded by ignorance becomes numb to the sufferings, and the transcendentalist becomes transcendental to the sufferings and experiences transcendental bliss. And the person in between is aware of the suffering and is not yet aware of the transcendental bliss. So he's the one who's not happy. So when you become Krishna conscious, sometimes you fall into this middle stage where you're not fully yet appreciating Krishna, and you're definitely seeing the miseries of the material world. So you could say, it's a little bit of a torture. And it's a little bit of a torture if we can't penetrate deeper into the holy name, into the pastimes and so on, because they're so sweet and there's so much there. And it's so unfortunate if we can't penetrate it. But that's a reality for many of us. And those of you who are younger devotees, then you may experience more of the reality of the perception of material miseries than the perception of transcendental bliss. Although you will experience transcendental bliss, there's no question. But it's like some devotees will say, no, I don't have an attraction for reading Prabhupada's books, or I don't read his books that much. But there are other devotees who will say that they could read all day. So they've developed an attraction, and everything that they're reading is very juicy and tasty, but it may not be juicy and tasty for someone else because they haven't developed that attraction. So this discussion was about sense gratification, and what my introduction have to do with sense gratification? Well, the problem with sense gratification is it's the opposite of austerity, and austerity purifies the senses, and sense gratification covers or contaminates the senses. So if we engage in more sense gratification than is necessary to maintain the body and soul, then what happens is our senses become contaminated to some degree, or at least we can say they're not becoming purified. And so, as a consequence, we're kept out of relishing Krishna consciousness on a deeper level. We're prevented from understanding deeper levels of Krishna consciousness. So this is something I want you to think about. Like, the senses are very strong, no doubt, and we're looking, because we have a body, we look for pleasure through the body. But when we're trying to get pleasure from the body, which has no relation to Krishna, like taking prasadam or engaging the senses in service, it's covering. You know the verse, Atasi Krishna Namadi Nabhaved Grayam Indriyai. Nabhaved Grayam Indriyai. Krishna can't be understood by what Prabhupada translates as the blunt material senses. So what are the blunt material senses? Senses that are not purified by bhakti. Nama, the name and the form, the lila, the pastimes, everything about Krishna, it's not understood by the blunt material senses. So you see that among scholars who are not devotees. They read Shastra, but they're not relishing it like a devotee relishes it. And they're not understanding it like a devotee understands it. So that's because they're not engaged in devotional service, and they're they're not ordinary people in the sense that somehow or other they're attracted to hearing about Krishna. But those scholars who are not devotionally or spiritually inclined, who do not do any kind of spiritual practice, it's very difficult for them to understand, but to speak of relish. So that's just a practical example of how it's not just that you're reading Bhagavatam or seeing the deities or hearing the holy name, and it's the same for everybody, is quite different. So when we engage in sense gratification, then it covers our ability, or it minimizes our ability to be able to understand Krishna and relish Krishna consciousness. And that's like a huge price, don't you think? It's a huge price to pay for a little physical gratification beyond what is necessary. So that's, I think, super, super important point to understand. And then, contrarily, if we make some sacrifice, we eat a little less, we sleep a little less, we control our hearing and our eyes, and we spend less time in frivolous activity and so forth, or no time in frivolous activity, then senses become purified, and the result of that purification is everything Krishna conscious becomes more attractive. And when we hear and chant then it goes much deeper and it's more relishable. And Krishna consciousness just becomes relishable in all ways. So that's, you pay a price for doing austerity, but that's what you get for it. And you don't pay a price for sense gratification, but you pay the price later by not getting Krishna consciousness. So lately I was in a discussion about how to apply sexual restraint in marriage. How to apply sexual restraint in marriage. So as we know, sexual desire is really the strongest, or the center of all materialism, and the strongest of material desires, and the highest form of sensual gratification. Therefore, the most difficult to control. And so in the discussion that we're having about this, there was the reality of how to deal with people in Grihastha life who can't strictly follow the no illicit sex principle, strictly meaning only once a month, with the idea or the hope of having a child after chanting 50 rounds. So what about those who can't follow that? What do we do with them? Do we de-initiate them, take back their 3 strands of neck beads, pull off their Brahman threads, and how do we deal with it? So it's a reality, and we could say, well, that's the standard. If they're not following the standard, then they're fallen and so forth. And we couldn't argue with that. So and then devotees were asking me, well, if devotees can't follow, which many can't perfectly follow all the time, what would you tell them? And I said I would try to help them follow, and I would tell them that just understand that when you engage, excuse me, I'm still jet lagged, when you engage in sexual activity which isn't for procreation, it is going to affect your ability to go more deeply into your Krishna consciousness. So, and we said, I think we said last time, that some will say that if you keep sex within marriage, it's not sinful. It's contaminating to some degree, but not sinful. Or even, okay, so for the sake of argument, that makes the argument that it's contaminating. And so it's contaminating. And contaminating means then it inhibits our ability to hear and chant more deeply and with more relish. So I think that's important to understand when we're thinking about any kind of sense gratification, whether it's sexual or otherwise, that, on one hand we're chanting our rounds, we're trying to go more deeply into Krishna consciousness. On the other hand, if we engage in sense gratification, it's the elephant's bath, and it's like we're going up and down and up and down. And austerity, in Bhagavatam, or in the purport, Prabhupada says austerity is the wealth of the Brahmins. So what's the wealth? The wealth is the purification. So you do some austerity, you get purified. The austerity is difficult, but you get purified. Hare Krishna. You get purified by the austerity, and then you inherit this wealth. And then, I think we had also discussed, maybe we didn't, but austerity is necessary to achieve anything. So it's not that if you're not a devotee, you will be avoiding austerity. No, austerity is necessary. In any big city in the world, by 6 o'clock, there's traffic. People are going to work that early. So that means they're getting up 5 o'clock and getting ready and going to work. That's austere. But it's not purifying their senses. So we're fortunate because we can do austerity, it'll purify our senses. And there's a huge benefit from that. So, Krishna Karshini says, you said we're devotees in between, meaning we yet don't feel full attraction, at the same time aware of miserable nature. This world, yeah, there's actually a verse in Bhagavatam about that. So how to survive this difficult stage? And not fall down, because not having full attraction to Krishna and make us leave, yeah. The answer is actually simple, and it was just what Prabhupada did. So what he did with us is he developed this morning program and gave us service in spreading Krishna consciousness so that we would be in touch with Krishna non-stop all the time. And so that way we would be in touch with that spiritual energy, and so it actually would be mostly blissful for us rather than in limbo between bliss and misery. So although that's what it says in Bhagavatam, at the same time, even though we're not paramhamsas and transcendental, but when we're engaged in devotional service for that period of time, you could say we're transcendental, or at least sattvic, and we're coming in touch with that Swarup Shakti of Krishna, and so through various aspects we come in touch with the Swarup Shakti, and so therefore we feel happy, we feel blissful, we feel happy. It's just that when you're transcendentally situated, you'll always feel that way. When you're not transcendentally situated and you stop that service, then you feel it. So grihastas will feel it more, because most grihastas can't be engaged 24 hours a day in devotional service like a brahmachari or brahmacharini or vanaprastha sannyas. So this verse will be felt a little bit more by grihastas, especially when they're younger in Krishna consciousness. Because they'll be blissful at the temple, they'll hear class was blissful, kirtan was blissful, but then they have to go out in the world and they're not surrounded by that Swarup Shakti. Or they'll try to access that Swarup Shakti at work, but it's going to be harder. So, yeah, I would say, okay, so then for grihastas, what do? Well, it's the same solution. You try to get into the fire as much as you can, and be tolerant of your mind and senses. Yeah. What I've always done is kept my mind and sight on the goal. So even if I had slipped to a point where I wasn't really experiencing it, I would at least be inspired to go for it. And so I think we could rephrase your question and said, how do you maintain inspiration when you're not inspired? That's, I think, another way of asking this question. And the way to maintain inspiration when you're not inspired is to be focused on the goal, to remember the goal, to remember how pleasing and wonderful the goal is. And if you remember your goal, even though it's difficult, you'll get inspiration. Just like in material activities, the process of achieving a goal may not be blissful, but the goal is blissful. So when one focuses on the goal or appreciates the goal, that keeps them inspired. Hare Krishna. Gauranga. Yeah. Last night I didn't get to bed till 2. Well, I went to bed at 11, got up at 12. I went to bed at 2, got up at 4:30. Then I tried to rest a little bit in the afternoon. It wasn't working, so it's all hitting me now. So that's personally how I've been inspired, and I also see that that's how Prabhupada tried to inspire us, or one of the ways he tried to inspire us was Krishna's amazing, and you can have a relationship with Krishna. So even though it's difficult, still the relationship is so special that why wouldn't you be able to tolerate whatever you have to tolerate in order to have the relationship, in order to awaken it? Because you're going to have to tolerate something to get what you want. And the bigger your goals, the more difficult they are to achieve, and Krishna consciousness is the biggest goal. So shouldn't it be worth us tolerating or undergoing whatever we have to undergo in the process of becoming purified? And you could say in the process of waiting to be Krishna conscious. And I think the answer is obviously yes. But if we forget that, then it can be difficult. And also, by being more associated with Krishna, you experience Krishna consciousness more, and that taste allures you. So it's two things. It's the taste that, it's like when you get a taste, what I always advise devotees and advise myself is remember that taste. Sometimes you can be participating in something very ecstatic. Like Satyanandan Swami came last weekend, I think it was. He came to Alachua, and we were just having lots of programs. It was very ecstatic. But I was thinking that after he goes and things go back to normal, it's easy to forget the ecstasy and how special it is. And I always tell devotees that when you're experiencing something special in Krishna consciousness, don't forget it, because sometimes you're not going to experience it, and it's easy to forget it because you're not experiencing it. So don't forget it. And so sometimes you just have to remember how great Krishna consciousness is. You have to remember why you came. You have to remember what you're doing here, all these things. And if you forget all that, then yes, you can go away. And you generally tend to forget that if you stop reading, your chanting is not done well, you're not getting association. The 5 most important activities in bhakti is chanting and hearing, associating, deity worship, living in holy place. Well, if you eliminate those from your life, then how could you go on in Krishna consciousness? And I think a lot of people eliminate those to one degree or another, and then they start having difficulty. So if we're engaged in those 5 activities, even though we don't live in a temple, and even though we may work, if we're engaged in those activities, are so potent, we should be okay. There should be enough bliss to carry us through the day. When your day doesn't have a lot of bliss in the beginning, then it's hard, because the material world is what it is, and so it's just hard if that's what's happening. So if, it's like Vaisheshika Prabhu, he gave a nice example. What was it? So he said there's some experiment. They took 2 animals. I hope they weren't humans, I don't remember. Took 2 animals, maybe monkeys or dogs or something, and they fed one extremely nutritious food, and they fed another one very unnutritious food, and after a month or 2 weeks, whatever, there's a huge difference. So one dog was very strong and shiny coat and so forth, and the other was the opposite. And he was explaining this after reading a verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it said men become strong by eating ordinary grains, but devotees become strong by reading or hearing the nectar of Krishna Lila. So, that verse and purport nicely explain things. If we don't eat well, we're going to become weak. And if we don't eat enough of through our ears, we're also going to become spiritually weak. It's just a simple equation. So, but you could say that's true for any of those 5 processes. If you minimize them, it will have significant ramifications. And another thing which I'm seeing from the position of trying to help especially younger devotees is how easily younger devotees become overcome by Maya. It's just like 1 month they're doing really well, and then the next month something happens that throws them off, And it's just hard for them to get back into their schedule and so forth. So, yeah, Maya's, she's after you. And if you're not surrounding yourself with devotion, with enough devotional activity, then it's going to be a problem, for sure. But in any way, you've all had amazing times in Krishna consciousness, so if you can remember those times, especially when you're not doing well, you're not inspired, if you can remember those times, then that's fantastic. Remember Krishna's pastimes. That's what's... See, the problem is that we've been in the material world for so long, it seems so real to us, and Krishna Lila doesn't seem real. So we have to remind ourselves that's the reality. Krishna Lila is the reality. And that's what we're meant to participate in. We always should know we're shooting for the reality. That's where we're going with our Krishna consciousness. And we've been alienated from reality for a long time, so it seems awkward, and Maya will make us think it's awkward or strange, or maybe it's not even right, it's so far out. There's a Buddhist yoga center, we did a course today on stress management, and I was telling them that the cause of your distress is that you have a body, and at one point you were in paradise and you wanted to not serve but be served, and you came here. And I said, there's beings on other planets, and we've come down. And I said, did anyone ever hear that there were beings on other planets? And a lot of these people are Buddhist, and they said no. So, we know there's Goloka Vrindavan. We know there's Braj. We know so many things. And so we should focus, at least remember, think about once in a while. This is real. That what we think is real is not real. Things down here are not real. That's real. And we sometimes get it backwards. And that can be, we think, oh, what am I doing, Krishna consciousness? It's so weird. Why do I believe this? That's symptomatic of either offense or bad practice. And then so when your senses become dull by engaging in sense gratification and not engaging in enough Krishna consciousness, then your faith will decrease. Yeah. Because, if you're not tasting or experiencing, then your faith decreases. Right? So, the way I see it is like Krishna consciousness is a formula. And if you don't do the formula, then how can you expect a result? And then you could say, oh, Krishna consciousness doesn't work, or I'm not happy, or I wasn't tasting anything, or it wasn't working out. When in fact, none of those things are true ultimately, or they don't have to be true for you. It's just that you didn't take it right. Does that make sense? Shankarabhat says she loves austerity. That's good. And she's missing Alachua. If any of you can develop a love for austerity, that's really valuable. And that's really, really important, because if you don't love austerity, I think you're in the wrong movement, because, we're supposed to be up early in the morning, take bath, chant, these are all quote-unquote austerities. Of course, it's really devotional service. We don't categorize it as an austerity, but for someone who doesn't have taste, it's austere. maybe objectively you can't say it's really an austerity, but for someone who's not used to going to bed and getting up early, it's an austerity. It is. And if Krishna consciousness seems austere to us, why would we do it? It's going to be really difficult. Right? So if you can learn, or you can somehow or other gain appreciation for austerity, that's fantastic. And if you don't have appreciation for it, try to appreciate that austerity is your real wealth, and it opens up Krishna consciousness to you in an amazing way. And if we don't do austerity, then if we don't do austerity, then we're harming ourselves, because we're blocking ourselves from realizations we could get if we did a little more austerity. Like you distribute books, you get so many realizations. You tell people about Krishna, you get so many realizations. Isn't it? You make some sacrifice, you get so many realizations. Yeah, that's the payoff. You get realizations. Krishna Karshani says, if brahmacharis or brahmacharinis would be so blissful living in the temple, would not get married to get less bliss. It's not exactly like that. I have a different take on it. Now, you could say that. You say, why would they get married if Krishna consciousness is so blissful? It doesn't make sense. I look at it a little differently, because I can look at it through my own experience. Krishna consciousness was blissful, and I wasn't looking for sense gratification. So then one could say, well, then why'd you get married? Because I could see by my psychophysical, I could see by my nature that part of me wanted to remain brahmachari and part of me didn't. And I could see that the part that didn't was not a fractional part, but it was, at least 50%. And I could see that it was by nature. It wasn't, because I really thought, well, being single would be good. But by nature, I wasn't able to do it. By mind, my mind appreciated it. So it can be that one is blissfully engaged in devotional service, but they have a certain nature. And that nature doesn't suit them in the brahmachari ashram. And sometimes men take sannyas because they're not suited to be brahmacharis, but nowadays sannyas is not going to be given, it's not given early on anymore. But so that's the idea. If they're so blissful, why would they marry? Because they want to be more blissful. It's just some people have a nature and some people have a different nature. And those with the different nature, they'll want to marry. Those with another nature, they won't want to marry. It's like that. Is that okay? So, you want me to read something else? Unless you have another question, I can read something. Well, it's Bhagavad Gita 262, Dayato Visham Punsam. When you meditate on sense gratification, you become attached to it. Let's read it. While contemplating the object of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. It's a famous verse. It's the verse that advertisers use. I can't tell you where I am right now. It's top secret. Yeah, time to sleep. Let's read. Anyway, let's see if I can stay awake. If I fall asleep reading you. So, Dayato Visham Punsam. Vishaya means the objects of sense gratification. And Dayato means meditating. And Punsam means a person. Okay, if I yawn one more time, or I nod one more time, then we'll end class. Is that okay? So I had written some realizations in this. Dayato Vishampun Sangha. Sangha means attachment. Dayato, meditating, Vishan, on sense gratification, Punsam, a person. Dayato Vishampun. Sangha Teshu Vajayate. In those sense objects, attachment develops. Sangat Sanjayate Kama. And then from that attachment, lust develops. Kama Krodha Vijayate. And when that lust is not satisfied, then anger develops. Frustration. So I say, I think this is what I wrote, unless it's Vishwanath Chakravarti or Thakur. Contemplating is to focus. Okay, you decide who wrote this, Mahatma Das or Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Contemplating is to focus on and think over something again and again. Unless we are attracted or repulsed by a person, object, or situation, we don't maintain much focus on it. In other words, something that is neither positively or negatively charged in our mind will not hold our attention. And if it doesn't hold our attention, it will not take us to the next level of attachment or repulsion. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that if you're contemplating something, either because you like it or you don't like it, and it doesn't have a lot of attraction, or it doesn't have a lot of distraction, or hatred or enmity towards it, you won't focus on it. You won't contemplate it. So anything that we're contemplating has a lot of positive energy for us. And that's dangerous. And naturally, we want to contemplate things that have the most positive energy. Okay, I think I've been defeated now. I think I have to surrender and take rest. Anyway, we made it 40 minutes. That's better than nothing, right? So I think we're going to do this again tomorrow night. If I take rest now, I should be okay for tomorrow. I just couldn't get to sleep last night. So is that okay? And yeah, the moral of the story is, if you do austerity, you'll understand Krishna. Okay? So we'll stop here. Is that all right? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.